So when we're talking about things like information disclosures, we're talking about how we extend our trust to different formal parties. So an information disclosure is usually a document that says what information we are comfortable with another organization using. But we're going to talk about a couple other things that are similar, though not necessarily what you'd consider to be a formal information disclosure. Um, so we have things like EULAs and terms of service, right, that tell us what we can expect a company to do with our data and what exactly we're giving them rights to in regards to our data. Now, what that means is really we don't have much choice in what companies do use or don't use. One of the things that we kind of lose rights to in some sense is, let's say if you're on Reddit and you make a post, that content can be used by Reddit at any time for any purpose uh, because you posted there and shared it through their EULA and terms of service. So it's important to understand that when we have these particular things happening, we are basically signing away our rights to certain things. So we do sign away our rights to privacy in some sense by doing this. And one of the ways that this happens is public records. So, for those of you who don't know, in the US, much of what we do is public record, right? So, things that become public record are home purchases. Uh, we have criminal records become public. And we have things like salary of state and federal employees. So if you really wanted to, you could figure out exactly how much money I make through a I actually don't know if the database is currently updated, but there is a database out there that tells you how much money I make on a particular year based off of my contract because I am a government employee. I am a state employee as I am a faculty member at the university, and the university is a state university. So that makes me a government employee. So technically, my salary information is public domain, it's public knowledge, which means that you can find that information through public records and through things like Freedom of Information Act requests and those kind of things. Now, other things that can happen is that you'll realize that a lot of what you do becomes public record even when you didn't realize it. For example, if you're making a home purchase, that becomes public record because the government needs to know who they're taxing, and that means that that record is then stored in a public database, and we have a record of that transaction so that the government can do their job in terms of taxation and some other things that they do with that data. But it also means that other people who want to, I don't know, figure out where you live can do that pretty easily. What it also means is that you can make guesses about people's salary, even if they're not a government employee, by the type of home that they purchase. So if you look up somebody's home, you can make a guesstimate about what kind of salary they have, or at least what kind of family salary they have, right? Because there might be multiple people who work in a particular home. So you can get an idea of how much money a family makes from that kind of thing. And this is where we're going to start getting into something called data mining. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but data mining is going to be really important. And it comes down to this idea that we have data and we're going to track that data and then we're going to analyze that data to glean new information. But before we get to that, I really want to talk about cookies because this is another way in which our data becomes recorded by people without our knowledge. So it's not just public records, for instance, it's also things like cookies where they track our usage on websites or across several websites, and then they store that data and possibly send it back to their parent website, because cookies do belong to a particular website, or they send it to a particular service. A really good example of a cookie in use is that Facebook like button. So when you log into Facebook, it has your session secured, right? and then you go to another website, and I don't know if this is really that common anymore, but it used to be really common for people to put a Facebook share or a Facebook like button on their web pages outside of Facebook. What this did is it allowed for companies to interact with Facebook without actually having to do too much. So they would embed a like or a share button onto their web page, and you could like it directly as a user from that company's webpage rather than through Facebook. Now, what this means is that when you're on that other web page, that Facebook cookie with your session ID and your account information was being used actively. It also means that Facebook had the ability to track that data that you were on this particular website and possibly liking or sharing something, or even making note that you didn't like or share something. So we use cookies as part of the web development process, and they're an essential part for making sure that web services work correctly. How those cookies work, though, varies strongly based off of those companies using them. So it's important to understand that our data, even when we're trusting a particular site, could be using a cookie to track your information and web usage across multiple sites. And it's something to remember with regards to our privacy and what we expect when we're using different services. Now let's get back to data mining. Data mining is a really important aspect of the information age and what we talk about when we talk about the loss of privacy in terms of the internet and in terms of technology as a whole. So data mining is really about us collecting data and then tracking and analyzing that data. So first of all, I maybe create an account somewhere. Maybe I make an account with a phone company because I got a cell phone and I have a lot of cell phone records, right? And then the company that I signed up for can track my usage of that cell phone. They can see what calls I make, they can see what texts I make, how I use my data, those kind of things. All of that goes through their servers, so they can track that data and store it how they want to. And then they can do an analysis over that data in order to see things that maybe I would like as far as advertising goes. So they might target advertising toward me for maybe a new phone or a different phone plan, or maybe they'll try to get me onto a family plan because they know that I have family and they're not currently on the same plan I am. There's a lot of potential for tracking there and kind of invading your private life. There's also this idea of taking data from like Kroger's rewards program. So if you buy stuff at Kroger using the rewards program, they're actually tracking your purchases using that rewards program. What it does, it allows them to tie purchases to a particular ID. That ID can then be used to collect all of your purchases over, for example, a whole year or several years, and do an analysis of what kind of coupons you might want at a given time, or do an analysis to understand what kind of products you might like and where you might need to go in the store. It can help them in a variety of ways as far as a business goes, but it again is that slight invasion into our privacy that technology enables to happen. Now, this can sometimes be beneficial. For example, if I get a coupon for a product that I am already going to be purchasing, well, that's great. I'm going to purchase the product and I got some money off. But what's more likely to happen is because they don't want to give me a coupon for something that I'm guaranteed to purchase. They want to give me a coupon for something that I'm maybe going to purchase to encourage me to actually spend that money, which means that they're trying to sway me from probably not going to purchase to probably going to purchase based off of using that data that they collected on me. This starts getting more and more concerning as we look at different examples of how this has been done before. The Kroger Rewards program, probably not a big deal for most of you. But if you go to an outlet mall or another type of mall and you're connected to the mall's Wi-Fi, which is something people do commonly, and then you find out that they are tracking your movement through the store by tracking your Wi-Fi and tracking your cell phone, maybe you're getting a little bit more concerned about how people are collecting your data and what people are doing with it. It's really important to have an understanding of how this data mining works and who gets access to this data. Just because one company collects your data doesn't mean that that same company is also going to be doing the analysis and tracking across multiple other data formats. It could be possible that somebody, for example, a credit card company, wants to talk to a phone booth, or sorry, not a phone booth, a toll booth company to get data about who's going in and out through the toll booth. Now, most of the time you'd consider a lot of that information to be private, but a credit card company might be able to match up the timestamps and amounts for transactions at the toll booth with their credit card data in order to identify what people are doing, what their customers are doing. So they can get data from multiple places, and when you sign your data over to a particular company, they could possibly be using that data to generate revenue by just directly selling the data rather than doing anything with it. And there's something important to remember also about opt-in versus opt-out policies. So opt-in means that I have to opt in, I have to choose to be enrolled into this program. And a good example of this is basically whether or not you want to be an organ donor on your driver's license, right? So, by the way, highly recommend everybody check that box yes whenever they go get their renewed driver's license. But the idea is that we all have our own bodily autonomy and we have to opt into that kind of program. And opt out is automatically enabled. So it means that we're already enrolled in something and we have to figure out how to get out of it rather than how to get into it. And a good example of this is really a lot of the data and advertising policies from Facebook and Google. When you create an account on either of these the first go around, you're not asked what kind of advertisements you want to receive or what kind of data you're comfortable with them using. Instead, it's just like, hey, we're going to use your data. And then you have to go into your account settings to specifically change what kind of data policies you want associated with your information, with your account. So it's important to remember that there's a distinction between those things, and there is potentially an ethical responsibility from companies about whether or not they use opt-in versus opt-out. And it could also depend on context. So like I said, opt-in is what we use in the US for organ donation, and you might suggest that maybe it should be an opt-out process instead. A lot of times people aren't against donating their organs in the event that they, can't use them anymore. But because it's a checkbox on a form and it's optional, a lot of people just don't fill it out. In other countries, it's an opt-out process, so it's defaultly checked, and you have to basically say, no, I don't want to be in this program. I prefer not to be an organ donor. And more people are in the organ donor program. It's an important distinction that sometimes opting in and opting out are different levels of ethical depending on the context. So don't just assume that any one of these things is necessarily bad. How they interact with us has different ethical ramifications based off the context in which they are used.